Hey, I'm Lana from Lana Glowshot Art, and in this video, we'll be unboxing the December 2023 sketch box. This is a true mixed media box, and in this video, we'll be exploring how to render volume and a variety of colored pencil techniques. Ready? Let's go. The surface in this month's box is the Rembrandt watercolor paper. This is a rough, heavyweight watercolor paper that's 140 pounds. And there are 10 4x6 sheets in the poly bag. Look at how thick and durable they are. We also have 3 Derwent ChromaFlow colored pencils in Pompeian Red, Obsidian Green, and Deep Sea. Let's start by swatching the Pompeian Red. When you work with colored pencils, you want to work with several light layers rather than pressing really hard right from the beginning. You'll notice right away that the texture of this surface doesn't allow you to get into all the nooks and crannies very easily. You're going to get a very textured coverage. But if you would like to get into all of those little gaps, I recommend working with an incredibly sharp colored pencil. I like the Faber-Castel colored pencil sharpener from the February 2023 box. This is a great way to get a razor sharp colored pencil that will be able to get into all of the grooves of this really rough watercolor paper. With your sharp pencil, come in with more pressure and work the pigment into all of the little nooks and crannies. I'm sure you've used colored pencils at some point before, but have you ever used them on a rough watercolor paper? It's gonna change the way that the pencil moves around on the paper, so play around with a couple different marks and get used to this new sensation. A gradient is a great way to play around. Start with a lot of pressure on the left and ease it up as you move towards the right. I like to move my pencil in small circular movements, going in lots of different directions to keep my coverage and my mark consistent. Sometimes colored pencil gets a bad rap and people complain that it's too difficult to fix mistakes because colored pencil doesn't erase very easily. But the way to combat this is to start with really light pencil sketches and build them up slowly. Here I'm sketching in a cute little winter beanie and I'm working with really basic shapes first. After establishing the basic shapes, I can go over another layer, refining my edges. Here I'm adding more detail to the fur, but it's easier because I already know where the fur is. Now, to make this drawing three-dimensional, I need to decide on an angle of the light, and I've decided that it'll be in the top right corner. That means the left side of my drawing will be in shadow. So I put that in with my Pompeian Red first, and then I do the gradient as I move towards the right. I can use the direction of my pencil strokes to make this hat look more three-dimensional too, wrapping around the three-dimensional head that would be underneath it. Next up, I am swatching the Obsidian Green and the Deep Sea. And I'm going to show you how to use these 2 colored pencils to sketch a pine tree with snow on it. Draw a couple triangles stacked on top of each other, and then add some light blobbies that are organic in shape that will represent the snow. Keep these shapes different on each tier of the tree and begin to fill in the tree with the obsidian green. Work in light, thin layers and keep your direction of your pencil strokes going down and out, the directions that the branches are growing on the tree. This is going to add more volume and dimension and believability to this little sketch. Once you're done with the obsidian green, switch over to your Deep Sea and intensify the shadows by pressing really hard in the darkest areas. Then you can add some volume to the snow by giving a little light shadow along the bottom edge of each of your organic shapes. Next up, we have the Sketchbox Signature Gouache in Blue Slate and the Sketchbox Signature Round No. 6 paintbrush. This paintbrush comes to a nice sharp point, so you're able to use it for a variety of brushwork and washes. This paint is incredibly thick right out of the pot, so you're going to want to add some water to it so it's a milky texture to paint more smoothly. Play around with a variety of different marks that you can make with this brush, tipping the brush up on its point and also on its side. Here I am making a gradient and I'm starting with the darkest paint that I can make over to the left. So that's the least diluted paint possible. Then as I move to the right, I'm adding more and more water. Having a palette can be a great way to mix a variety of different shades. And if you have a palette, great, but you can also use the top lid to a plastic container. Now we're going to render a sphere. Start by freehanding or tracing a circle that takes up the majority of your page. If you're uncomfortable with freehanding circles, you can use the ring ruler from last month's box. Next, we are going to add the core shadow, and that is a shadow on the far left side of the sphere. I've identified that the light is coming from the top right corner, and so the darkest part will be on the bottom left. Notice that my marks are following the form of this sphere as I paint it in, rather than being perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal lines. That allows the shape to feel more three-dimensional. As I move to the edge of the bottom left, I am adding in some reflected light. So I added more water. It's actually a little lighter in the farthest left. Now, as I'm moving towards the top right, I'm adding more water as I move towards that light shape or the lightest part of my sphere. I'm adding more and more water each time, and I'm allowing the gouache to just move around on the paper a little bit. It's hard to keep it super controlled when you're using this much water, but we can refine all the details with a colored pencil after our gouache has dried. The last piece is that cast shadow, which is the darkest part of the sphere, and I want the most concentrated version of gouache possible for this. This blue slate gouache only goes to about a 60% level value. That's from a 0, which is white, to a 100%, which is black. So I want to make it a little bit darker, and I'm going to use the deep C to really push the darkness in my core shadow. I start with the darkest that I can possibly get, and then I lighten it up as I move towards the light shape where the light is directly hitting the sphere. This is like doing several mini gradients right next to each other and actually blending them together. Continue to work from the core shadow towards the light shape in several light layers until everything is feeling really blended. And you can keep coming back and darkening that core shadow as you go so that you can push it as dark as possible. Then you will lighten it up just a little bit as you move towards the bottom left so that you have that little bit of reflected light. The cast shadow is going to be just as dark, if not darker, than the core shadow, and these marks you might want to make more horizontal so that they feel like they are part of a flat surface. As you work with the colored pencil on this rough surface, you're going to develop a little bit of dust as the colored pencil breaks down on this rough texture. So you can actually use your finger to blend the dust around and to do a little bit more blending. Just be careful that you don't bring it into a white part of your drawing that you want to remain clean. Last but certainly not least is the Kuretake white manga liner. But because it's white, we can't swatch it on a clean piece of the watercolor paper. Instead, we need to tone a piece of paper with the blue slate gouache first. To activate this marker, shake it vigorously and then remove the cap and press the tip to the surface. It's common for quite a bit of paint to come out at once, so be careful and always test your marker on a scratch piece of paper. I encourage you to play around with a variety of different marks that you can make with this manga liner, possibly some fluid lines and building up the lines to create more interesting line quality. One thing that I noticed while working with this manga liner is that it can be borderline transparent on its first application, but if you let it dry and then come back and apply fresh paint over the top, it can be a lot more opaque. So this can be a great solution if those whites aren't going quite as white as you want them to from the beginning. Oh, and remember that sphere we just painted? You can use the manga liner to add a strong white highlight. Last month, we discussed radial symmetry, and here is another excellent opportunity to practice it again. You can divide your space into equal segments and create symmetrical patterns all the way around. This allows you to create a really fun, interesting snowflake. You could also use your knowledge of the sphere to design a snow globe, which is the prompt for this month. Now let's put all these materials together and create a cute little drawing of a snowman. I'm starting with a really light sketch so that I know where I'm going, but it's so light that if I make a mistake or need to change something, I have the opportunity to do that. Once my sketch is all the way complete, I'm going to lay a thin wash of the blue slate over the entire thing. This will help keep the painting or drawing unified and will allow me to use my white marker over the top to add highlights. The snowman's head is a sphere, so I am able to render the sphere the same way that I did in the demonstration earlier, with that darker core shadow and then getting lighter as I move towards the area that's closest to the light source. I'm going to apply the same concept to the body and the hat, with the darker shadow on the left and getting progressively lighter with a smooth gradient as I move towards the right. This gives us a really good base layer to start with, and now I can grab my colored pencils and begin working on the depth in my value and the details. I made the core shadow darker with the blue sea, and then I added in several details and patterns on the hat and the scarf. You can make these designs as complex or as simple as you would like. Here I am accessing that prior knowledge of radial symmetry to create some snowflake knit patterns around the wide brim of the hat, and I'm incorporating those into the scarf too to add more unity. The Pompeian red is also a great choice for adding details to the carrot nose and some blush to the cheeks. I used the obsidian green to add a little bit more detail into the hat, and then it's time to switch over to the white manga liner for the highlights and to add more volume to the sphere. I start with the brightest white towards the top right, and then I make the marks lighter, specifically aiming to get some of those transparent whites as I move away from the brightest white. I'm doing this on the brim of the hat, on the little puffy cotton ball, and on the sphere that makes up the snowman's face. Once this white manga liner ink is completely dry, I can switch back over to my colored pencils to refine any more details and to put on that cute little button mouth. One of my favorite things to do with the white manga liner is to fix little mistakes. And after I completed this border all the way around, I realized there was a little bit of paint seeping out. So I used this white manga liner to correct those mistakes. And now this piece is complete. I hope you learned a ton about working with gouache and colored pencils in this video, and I can't wait to see what you create. So be sure to use the hashtag SketchboxDecember when you post your work online. For more unboxing videos and tutorials, you can head over to our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.